Michael Malone speaks to the media for the final time for the 2021-22 season. How far is enough change to the roster? And how the hell do you beat the Suns? This is Locked On Nuggets.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast, part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms, including the old YouTubes. We're up to 2,100 subscribers over on YouTube. Thanks so much for everybody who's subscribed. You can join the show, chat, talk, join the conversation. There's a guy called The Bull 123 that thinks that the Nuggets need to trade Jokic because he'll never win a title here. Lots of fun conversation.
Wow, you're really giving the hard sell there, man. You got to join that. You got to talk to
hard
the
sell. No, we got great folks in the chat. I love the folks in the chat. They're awesome, and they're like really like there's like side conversations that pop up. I think it's really cool, and it's very distracting for somebody like me who's a Gemini who's like trying to track that and then this and then the ads and like everything else. So I turn into a little bit of a hummingbird. Before we get started, it's bird feeder season. My wife's very excited that the birds are back, although. It's
always bird feeder season, Matt. Come on, man.
Definitely making that the title of the episode on the pod, since we don't have to worry about SEO. It's always bird feeder season. I have a curse coming up, so if you have kids in the car, mute it. I do have this one asshole squirrel.
Man, why do you say that though? People always tell me this, and I'm always like, "What do you not? You don't like squirrels?"
I like squirrels, and I don't mind them coming by like every now and again. It's the fact that there's this one squirrel is just like, I'm going to eat all the bird seed.
Yeah.
Of the primary bird feeder out the window.
Yeah.
And so my daughter used to be very defensive of the squirrel. She'd be like, squirrels have to eat too. But even she over time has been like, again. So that tells you. And that's a lot like Michael Malone and going back to how the defense has to get better. I don't know. There's no comparison here. So I have no segue. Yesterday, Michael Malone.
The chat hates the squirrels. I'm so surprised by this. You know, like Colorado has like 8 different species of squirrel. They're interesting. They're fascinating.
How do you know that there are 8 species?
I'm saying there's the pine squirrel. There's the fox squirrel that you're talking about. There's the gray squirrel. We got the Abert squirrel. Very local, a Colorado squirrel, if you will.
How are you a vermin expert?
This is what I do, man. There's like a little corner of things that I know everything about.
Okay.
And there's like a giant rest of the world I know nothing about.
You know nothing about. So Michael Malone meets with the media on Wednesday, along with Calvin Booth, assistant GM Calvin Booth, for the final time. We won't hear again from Malone. He'll probably be at Summer League. He may talk, he might not. And then we probably won't hear again from him unless he comes on the old podcast, hint, hint, sometime before the start of next season. Ahem.
An open invitation to Mike. Who's definitely listening to the show. Definitely.
Well, somebody's listening to the show for him at least. So we can talk about kind of like what the takeaways were. A lot of commentary about Jokic and the challenge to be more of a leader next season. I think that's still a gap that they're trying to navigate with. I don't personally know. I've never really felt that, like, I've read, so I always kind of have a temptation and an instinct to lead. It's more that the absence of leadership makes me anxious. And so I'm like, well, if nobody else is going to do it, then I'm going to step in because this makes me anxious, right? But like, I'm also not good at it. So, and when you realize you're not good at it, when I realized I wasn't good at leadership, I started to study a lot about it to see if I could get better at it. Spoiler, I can't, but I try really hard. And so I read a lot of books on it and all these type of things. And I do kind of think that there's some qualities of leadership, especially in a competitive environment like the NBA, that's just going to have to be innate. Like, I don't necessarily know. I think you can get better at these things. I think if you look at LeBron from like 2008 to where he was in 2012, and then honestly kind of a decline into 2022. But I think you can improve on these things and you can get better at the mechanisms of them. I'm just not sure that that great leadership is something that can be really developed from a non-entity into an entity. Does that make sense?
Sure. It's one of the you're setting up what you feel was one of the key points, which was Jokic's leadership, I assume.
Yeah.
All right. What I mean, it's really a fascinating discussion because first of all, I would agree with you. One of the things that's funny about professional sports, and one of the things that I think causes disconnect between like fans, analysts, and athletes, is that it's so easy to criticize things about player performance or poise under pressure or any of those to leadership, when in real life, very few of us actually do these things.
Yeah.
Like in our personal lives, like I'm in a position now with DNVR where I have to be a leader. I get to be a leader, I should say. I enjoy that role, but it is really hard. Like it's one of those things that the more you do and the higher the stakes go, the bigger a thing gets, the bigger your leadership becomes. And it's just like, this is really hard. It actually takes more energy than anything else goes into the parts of leadership and management. More effort than the creative aspects of it or just the workload aspects of it. And so I think when we sit here and talk about these things in the abstract, they're actually pretty easy. Like Jokic needs to be more vocal and he needs to like demand excellence from his team. And we're like, these things are easy to say. They're extremely hard to do. And they actually require an enormous amount of emotional and mental energy constantly to do. So it is, to me, one of the more central and fascinating questions now about the Nuggets' final step as they try to push towards winning a championship is Jokic has to make that leap. And that was part of what Malone talked about in his presser. And it's just so hard and so tricky to do. I would disagree with you in one way. You talked about like it's innate. You're right that there are certain leaders that people that have an innate sense of leadership. That is absolutely true. But I think that what was interesting about Michael Malone's comments yesterday was that he said Jokic possesses the important ingredients of leadership, namely that he already does all of the right things. He already sets the tone. He never goes half speed. He was talking about even in their stretching drills and just getting loose drills, he treats it like it's game 7 of the finals. And he said that's the hard part of leadership is you have to be about it every single day, because if you're ever not about it, people notice and you lose something. He's like, Jokic he never slips up. He's always doing this. That's the hard part. Now the rest of it is like, how do you leverage that? Like now that your entire team, and he's mentioned this about the Nuggets, they all respect him. They all listen to him. They all like, he actually doesn't have to work that hard at it because anything he says, they're like, well, this is our guy. We're all behind him. And I find that interesting. It kind of frames one of the key parts of this upcoming season.
I agree. I think there's so many layers to this where so much of leadership is not about just demanding excellence, but figuring out what the path is with each individual person towards setting that tone of accountability. I think there are people that if you bark at them, like this I think has always been kind of Chris Paul's problem, is I think Chris Paul's a great leader as long as you're on the same wavelength with him. Like the guys with the Suns, I think he looked into a great situation because
that's great. Yeah.
Like I think Booker wanted to be pushed. Yeah. I think Booker wanted to be barked at. I think Booker wanted to be like, hey, no, this is not like, you're going to have to be a good defender or I'm going to kick your ass. Right. Like, and every guy on that team, I think honestly has responded the same way. Like Ayton, like it's just been a good combination of guys.
This is the Michael Jordan theory of leadership where he was like, did I push guys too hard? Yes. But like, this is my style. It's like, there were probably great players that he pushed that it didn't work out with. He's like, I only know how to push one type of person. Yeah. And like, if we get those people, then my style works.
Right. And then I think with the Clippers, I think Chris Paul struggled a little bit because not all those guys were on that same wavelength. Like they needed a little bit more compassion or empathy or whatever of whatever it is that they needed. I think you look at Tim Duncan in San Antonio, there's probably guys that probably are like, I could have been like, I wish Tim had pushed me more or whatever. But Tim was like very, very even keeled in his approach. He was demanding. Like Tim was very much like, we're not going to tolerate nonsense. Right. But Tim wasn't, I don't necessarily know that I have a track record of hearing that Duncan was building like strong emotional relationships either. Tim treated everything like it's professionalism, it's a job. Right.
You sure about that?
Do what?
Are you sure about that?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Because I actually kind of think the opposite. Tim Duncan's the interesting one because he just didn't care about, like Yoke, he didn't care about anybody knowing behind the scenes. But I know this is a small, dumb thing. We've talked about this, I think, on the show before, but I always think back to after they lost a series, I can't remember, it was a loss. They all went out drinking and some pop like TMZ caught them stumbling out of a bar. And I remember him just grabbing Aaron Baines in this like very big brotherly way because Aaron Baines starts talking to the paparazzi.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't even say anything. He just grabbed them and it's like, nope, get over here. Yep. And I just remember seeing that. And one, it was like, it was just such a big brother moment that you knew he has these relationships with these guys like on a deeper level, but also just knows he's like the wise one that knows everything.
Other interesting comments, I think, from Malone, for me personally, little bit of discussion of backside rim protection.
Yeah.
That's like a very tactical thing that I think, and it's interesting because if you asked me about it, I would have been like, oh yeah, that's a problem. Like that was a really big consequence, honestly, of MPJ being 6'10" and athletic, him being out.
Yes.
Because like Jeff Green is a capable one-on-one defender, but Jeff Green is not a rim protector on the weak side. And
I think MPJ sucks at containment. Like he's just not, he can't move his feet to contain, but he is actually maybe the best rim protector Denver has because he's so athletic. He covers a lot of ground
and he wants to help.
He rebounds a lot. Yeah. He likes to help. Yep.
Like he wants to help. He wants to come down and like contest a shot and help out a teammate. Like those are things that he wants to do. Like his problem is that like oftentimes he'll do that and his teammates are like, no, please stay home on the 40% 3-point shooter. But like, I do think that that's part of the consequence. It's just like, you need, they did not have enough. They honestly, they were too small in general. They just were they were too small overall this season. But even we talk so much about the guards, like even their front court was just, you've talked a lot about the athleticism and wanting to see Joker with super athletic dudes. And I do think that because they built the roster around the assumption that MPJ would be available and play heavy minutes, that the rest of their roster was kind of counter programmed. And instead, maybe like this is honestly one of the things, and this kind of ties into our conversation yesterday about the centers. This is a weird thing to say because so often you preach diversity. They need both diversity and redundancy. They had neither this season somehow. And that was, I think, an issue. He basically said that he's given that like he's not going to like talk to the guys for a little while in terms of he thinks that they deserve like time and space, and then he'll reconvene with them, which I think is probably smart. There's been a consistent theme over the last half of the season of Malone basically being like, this team needs some time apart.
I agree with you that was a part of it. I kind of get a different sense though. And it's funny. You said that this was the final speech of the season for him. I actually think it was the first speech of the next season. This is honestly how I feel about it. Malone was turning a page. It was like, we are done with the practice session of our rise. We are now like in the game on portion of it. I felt like he was very deliberate in this exit interview, as Malone often is. He often comes to like a scrum of some sort with like, I'm going to get the agenda out. And the agenda with this time was it's go time. There's no like front office. It's go time. Players, it's go time. Coaching staff, it's go time. We have to maximize every single day. So while he talked about giving space, and obviously that's important, especially when we're 1 week removed from the last game of the season, there is that port. But I think more importantly, that was more of a process thing. Like these guys need a little bit of time off. I got the sense he's going to be a little bit more aggressive talking to players this offseason, like a little bit more of a, hey, not on a day-to-day basis, but hey, 20 weeks till camp. Where are we at? 18 weeks from camp. Where are we at? So, just kind of checking in on guys, making sure they all kind of know we're working towards something right now.
The most notable thing I think from Calvin Booth's availability was kind of an echoing of what Tim Conley had to say as well. If Nuggets fans were concerned that the front office would be like, look, we were injured, we're going to run it back. That is not the tone. And like I had heard this before, these comments. Like the sense I got from the front office was like, no, this was an instructive year. Like we're not where we need to be. And so we're going to need to change some things on some level. And so I think that's important to kind of factor in. Now, the question is going to be, how much change is enough change? And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that after the break. We'll do that when we come back on Locked On Nuggets. But first, I want to talk about BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. I was so close to a great night last night. I knew all the coverages that the Suns and the Mavericks were using versus each other. I had Chris Paul over points. I had Luka Doncic over points. I had Devin Booker over on assists at 4.5. He had 4 and checked out with 6 minutes to go. What a heartbreaker. What a heartbreaker. But I did nail the Sixers over 99.5 points. I think the Sixers offense was going to do a little bit better. I expect game 3 of that series to be competitive, but I do like the Miami Heat -1 in that matchup. And you can bet on it at BetOnline, which has got everything that you need from league reviews and news, including basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball, and this weekend's Run to the Roses as the Kentucky Derby is back. BetOnline is your continued source for all the sports wagering information from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for making Locked On Nuggets your first listen each and every day. Make sure to check out the Locked On NBA Big Board. Host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and author of the NBA Big Board newsletter is joined by Richard Stavins, Sam Ferris, and Leif Thulin, giving fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft, mock draft, player rankings, and of course, big boards. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Get started on looking at the guys that you want the Nuggets to draft on the Locked On NBA Draft Big Board. All right. So, Adam, as I teased before the break, the question about this one is how much change is enough change? And what I mean by that is I think everyone's going to have a different answer on this. I think there are those that want a complete teardown outside of Jokic, Jamal, Bones. Yeah. I think there's some that think that the starting 5 is probably okay. There's probably some that think that the starting 5 outside of Will Barton is okay. There's probably some that think that, look, I want to keep some parts of the bench, but others have got to go. I think and now these are all, you can't just be like, we need to remove, if we change X players, we will be better. You have to be deliberate in your solution. And the questions of the symptomatic problem solving versus the holistic problem solving is one of the most interesting and challenging parts of managing an NBA roster. My general question for you to start is, how much change is enough change for the Nuggets?
Well, I think some of this is the parameters are set by what the roster is. Like Jokic, you're not changing him, of course. I don't think you can trade Michael Porter. I mean, you can trade him and 2 firsts for nothing, maybe, to a rebuilding team, but you can't trade him without really compromising yourself. So Michael Porter, Jokic, those guys are locked in. I don't think you're going to trade Jamal Murray. Nor should you. Jamal just came back. He's a good player. Him and Jokic were a very good duo. So those 3 guys you're locked into. I don't think personally. So this question now becomes the first guy you start to ask is Aaron Gordon. He's a trade asset, a very useful player. To me, Aaron Gordon is a good piece of this. If Michael Porter can play, if he is healthy, him and Aaron Gordon together, I think is a very good 3-4-5 combo with Yoke. I like that. So to me, it's every piece after that to me is on the table. You start to talk about Will Barton. Obviously, I think Denver needs to move on from Will Barton. I think they need to find a trade partner for him, and they need to replace him with a very specific type of player with length, which Will Barton has, but with defense and somebody who can play within the system seamlessly. Denver's going to have enough offensive talent. They don't need that player to be great on offense. They just need them to know what to do, where to stand, where to cut, when to pass the ball here and there. So that part you need. But then you look at a Monte, Bones, Zeke. I think Bones and Zeke are very good players on very cheap contracts. I think Zeke Naji has a future with this team that's a very meaningful role. Bones Highland's a really good player with some upside. And again, on that rookie scale contract, which you're going to need for the next several years. So those 2 guys I look at keeping. The tough one for me that I think where this conversation starts about big change. Monte Morris has been a perfect backup point guard for the Denver Nuggets. He's been perfect. He's done everything he needed. He stepped into a starting role this year. They hit their over, even without Jamal Murray and Michael Porter. He's been very good. If you have Murray and you have Bones, and you know that to win at the highest level, you need defense, I just think Monte might be a guy that you have to move on from, either now or at the trade deadline. But I just don't think you can go into the playoffs next year with 3 small guards if you're going to go up against who are not elite defenders, if you're going to go and win a championship.
I'm going to push back on this real quick from No Name is God. My concern is that Tim might not be good in what we need to do. TC is superb in scouting and drafting, not really a great record in trading. So I think that's a little outdated. The Jeremy Grant trade was excellent.
What do you
They
mean?
got
Getting Jeremy Grant. Yeah.
yeah. They got it was excellent. Like
You're right. That trade actually does tilt it to where you could think it just went so poorly and that Jeremy Grant didn't want to be here, which is again, that's the thing you can't really know going into it, that a guy's just gonna be like, yeah, I don't like your city.
Not only that, but it's just like, what do players want? Money. They matched the offer from Detroit, a much worse team. They want to win, contending team. Right. They want to roll. They were willing to make him a starter, ready to have him be the third or fourth guy. Like, what are you going to do? They traded a first round pick for him. It was great. That was a great trade. The Aaron Gordon trade was honestly really good. They got good return on value on that. RJ's been bad in Orlando. I love RJ. Been bad in Orlando.
We liked him a lot, and he looks like a guy that if you like right now, we're like, would you trade him for a starting power forward? You'd be like, of course you would. What do you mean? Of course
yeah, for sure, 100%. And then like Gary was obviously, like Gary struggled too. Like Gary's hasn't been the same since the injuries. So like to me, that's to me, I think that the trades have been fine since like the Nurkic trade. I think, and even then, honestly, like Mace was really good for them. Like Mason was really good for them and what they needed.
Here's what I would say. I do think you make some good points about those two trades in particular that have been, I think, positive ones. I still feel like there are players that have sat on the roster that probably hung around 1 year too many. Like Will Barton probably hung around 1 year too many. Last year would have probably been the right year to trade him. If you were able to, I think it probably would have been a positive thing that maybe Denver has a little bit more flexibility, or you get somebody new in the pipeline. So there have been, I even look at like Paul Millsap, who his final year in Denver, maybe you could have traded him at that point. I know that they have a big thing about their culture, but Malik Beasley, you look at, if you start going back that far, a guy that you probably could have gotten a lot more value if you traded him before rather than just let him kind of run to the end of his rookie contract. So that's the thing that I think you look at. And even a guy now, this is where the Monte question is interesting, because Monte, to me, first of all, I love him. Like, he's one of my favorite Nuggets that have come through. If he played for the Nuggets all of next year, I think it would be a good thing for the Nuggets in the regular season. I don't think you can win the I'm not sure you could win the championship that way. So this is another one of those ones where you could hold on to him for one more year, but it might be that this is the year you make the trade. George Karl has a line: it's sometimes best to trade a player too early than it is too late. And maybe this is the Monte scenario where it's like, hey, this might be the right time to bring some new pieces into the pipeline that fill a more important role for you. So I don't know that I can give Tim Connelly the nod of confidence and say, hey, the front office is going to nail some trades here. To me, it's still TBD.
Okay, well, I have another question about Barton I want to ask you in a minute. Before we get there, I will push back on you. I think Monte has proven that he's totally fine in the playoffs as a backup. Like,
he's totally fine. But my point is, the Nuggets have to raise their level of defense to a much higher level. If you have Jamal Murray and you have Bones Highland, like, okay, that's all you need for your undersized guards. You got to get some length and some defense in there.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's where like they got to stack the rest of the raw. Like, I will say, like, when we talked about this, like, it's the margin guys, right? It's like they can't have guys that are just kind of there. Like, honestly, I think they need to trim some of the fat and bring in vets. I think that's going to have to be like some of it. Now, you're right in that getting guys in that spot. I will agree with you on the Monte point of, to me, I don't see Bones as a starter. Yeah,
I don't either.
I don't.
Not next year, and maybe he grows into it quicker than I expect. But I agree. Right. I do not see that in the immediate future.
Right. So if he's backup point guard and Monte's backup point guard, you have redundancy that you don't necessarily need.
Correct.
You'll miss Monte. Now there is always this risk, right?
I agree.
Like, this is the problem. Like, you traded Gary because you wanted Aaron, and you got Aaron, and you got this big wing defender, and then you needed guard defense. Like, right. There's this whack-a-mole thing that you have to kind of account for. But I do think that that's going to have to be part of it. Let me ask you something about Will. And if you upgraded the 2 spot, let's take the guy that Blackburn has said over and over and over again, which is KCP, which I don't know about the fit there, but let's say it's KCP, right? Quality shooter, doesn't need the ball, only going to shoot spot ups, a little bit of bounce, great defender, right? So you upgrade that spot. If you upgrade that spot without moving Will, if you find the cap machinations to get this done, I don't know how, but if you find the cap machinations to get this done, if Will's coming off the bench, is that role better and more okay? if Will's just playing fewer minutes, 20-25 off the bench. Is that tenable next season?
I think if you had a staggered bench lineup that featured Bones Highland, Will Barton, and Michael Porter Jr., mixed in with Zeke Naji probably coming off the bench as well, that's a great offensive unit. I don't know how good it is defensively, but it's a really good offensive unit. Sometimes there's an expiration date on a player with a team, and I feel like it might have passed for Will Barton. I just feel like that might have happened. So
I agree.
In theory, does that work? Yes. But is
it what's best? No.
Yeah, what's best? I don't know.
What's best for both sides?
When you say Bones is not a starter, I agree with you, but he might be a guy that is a closer against specific teams. And this is where I think Michael Malone's going to have a hard time is you're going to have matchups where it's like, hey, Bones and Murray, because you're not getting punished in the backcourt by whatever team you're playing in a playoff series, Bones and Murray is going to just destroy defenses. Those two good shooters, two good pick and roll players, you close a game with them. So, but the flip side of that is I think you need to be able to go to a more defensive lineup where maybe it's neither Bones or Barton or is out. You need to have that other guy. And so that's the thing is, could those two work? Yes. But your starting shooting guard probably needs to be at that point a super elite defender because to make the combos work.
Agree. I want to push back on this though from Ravon Hackshaw. You need more than fine to win at the highest level. Cameron Payne's the backup point guard for the Phoenix Suns. And they're playing at the highest level in the league right now.
Yeah, but he's also, you pick the one weakest player of their 10-man rotation. Like they have 9 great players in their rotation and then campaign. So Denver maybe can have one guy at campaign's level, but you can't have more than one. Cam Johnson,
Derek White's the backup point guard for.
He's good. Derek White is good for
Okay, Derek White has good things about him. Are you aware of the shooting splits?
It doesn't matter. That's what it takes. He has elite skills. He has an elite first step. He can pass. He gets to the rim. He gets into the paint. He collapses defense. He has an elite skill. That's the difference. Also, that's another team that rolls 8, 9, 10 deep. So if he's the 8th or 9th best guy, yeah, that's a really good player. Derek White is kind of Will Barton 3 years ago, a guy that actually can get into the paint and do stuff.
Okay. Derek White shooting 28.6% from the field, 17% from 3, and 41% from 3-point range in the playoffs so far. It's been a problem for Boston. That's been a problem for them.
All right, he might, but also he could have really good games ahead of him. He's the type of player that his shooting splits in aggregate don't matter.
Monte's had good games in the playoffs. This is my point. My only point here is just that, I don't think that Monte is below this level. I think for backup point guard, Monte's at that level. That's
if Denver had 2 elite defensive guards, one in the starting lineup, one on the bench, I would agree with you. But they don't. They have Bones Highland there, who's a very good offensive player, and so that's what I'm saying. I agree with you about Monte. I think he's a great player. You look at it and think, is there redundancy in what he does? And if the answer is yes, Bones Highland doesn't make any money. That's valuable. Going forward, that's valuable. If you could play guys that make $3 million or less, then that's super valuable. Monte makes $13 million, something like that. Okay, maybe that's where you allocate that money somewhere else.
Okay, so you think that they've got to solve the backcourt rotation is kind of what we're getting to in terms of balancing it more towards defense.
That's a huge part of it. To me, there's just no way you're going to win a championship against these top tier teams unless you can have an average playoff defense against which means you have to have great pick and roll defenders.
Yeah. It's interesting. I do worry about the whack-a-mole problem as much as it's very weird because years ago I was man, this team needs some defense, and everybody's the offense, they got it. All you need is to be fine defensively. And now it's kind of switched where it's no, they're gonna be fine offensively. They gotta get defenders. And I'm worried about. Look, I think if you take off some of the shooting, which is usually what you have to do in order to improve defensively, I think there is a cost there. I think finding guys that are 3-and-D high percentage shooters that are also top the level of defender you're talking about. I honestly I don't know how to get that done. I don't know how they can do that. They're going to have to take some chances and have it work out. I think.
Can I tell you one thing I wonder about?
Yeah.
Because length, it's aggregate length to me. There's lineups. I think you need to have a closing lineup that just features a great defensive backcourt or what have you. But it's aggregate length. And I do wonder if you play, a lot of minutes with a Jamal Jokic combo, obviously. But I wonder if you can get away with a lot of minutes with a Davon backcourt. He's not a guard. He's a wing. but I wonder if you can get away with like Bones and Davon as your 1-2, and because you have Jokic in those staggered minutes, you're going to play against him there. And Davon, while he's not a great defender, if you start stacking lineups that have Zeke Naji and Michael Porter and Davon and Bones, that's a lot of length. And maybe that actually becomes a pretty solid defensive lineup in the aggregate.
I'm thinking. Yeah, I'm just trying to like. It is problematic in that if Jamal wasn't coming off the injury, I would have a lot less concerns because he was honestly such a good defender before he got hurt.
I agree with that. I think that's an underrated aspect of him.
Like, and I don't, if he takes a step back, what I think is reasonable defensively, like Clay's not the same person after his 2 injuries.
He's way older too, but still, it's still a concern. I will say defensive chemistry is the most underrated thing, and Jokic and Murray have played so many minutes together. They have good pick and roll defensive chemistry.
Right. So you've got 3 strong defenders. You got 2 strong defenders in like Jamal healthy is a good defender. Aaron's a good defender. Joker's a good defender when he's not in certain matchups. So it really is just like it's that 2 guard spot. It's basically 2 guard spot, solve the Bones Monte conundrum, and then backup center. So I guess the question is just like, is there anything? I guess this is a genuine question I have that I don't know the answer to. Is there anything that the Greens give you that you would miss if they were gone?
Jermichael Green, just toughness. I mean, like the Nuggets are kind of short on that to begin with. So if you lost him, you would miss it. Jeff Green, I would say consistency. I know that people are going to laugh because they might think that means consistently bad. It's not. Like Jeff Green was just a known guy. Like he knows how to read the court. He would make his cuts. He didn't score a ton of points or this off of that, but there is something to just a guy that keeps the engine running.
I guess my last question is just, do you think any team would take a shot on MPJ? Do you think any team would?
No. Okay. He's played, 110 games or something in 4 years. I think that's and he has 5 years ahead on the contract. I think that's really tough. Now they would, if you attach like 2 first-round draft picks to it. That's the kicker on all this, is if some team might be willing to take the flyer on him if it meant unprotected future firsts in a moment in time when the Nuggets might be most vulnerable, like 2027 and 2029 or whatever. But the furthest out you could do, because you might look at that and go, oh, so Jokic retired and they might not have a contingency plan that could be a number 1 overall pick. So that's the only scenario I could see that happening.
Are we in agreement they got to get bigger?
And first of all, by the way, because I know some people sometimes think I'm hating on MPJ. I still love MPJ's talent. I'm so like bearish on his ability to stay healthy. Like that's just that's the reason this is a thing. But if you told me MPJ is just going to be healthy for the next 5 years, I'd be like, sweet, Nuggets are winning. Like we're back on top of the world. We got a healthy MPJ for 5 years, and he's an incredible talent.
Are we in agreement they got to get bigger?
Yes, that to me is almost. They need a bit more defensive, but I think half of that battle is they just have to get a lot longer, a lot longer.
Let's take a break. We'll come back, and we're going to talk about the Suns a little bit. I also want to address something that came up in the comments about the MVP race. I want to talk about that after the break on Locked On Nuggets. But first, I want to talk to you about Rock Auto. You've got all these makes and models, and it only seems to get bigger every single day. If you go to the big parts store, they're going to ask you all these questions that you're not going to know the answers to. Like, is your Odyssey an LX or an EX or a BX or an NX or what? They're going to wait, and then the person behind the counter is going to look at all these different parts, and they're going to say, oh, I don't have this one. Can you wait? I'll have my guy send it over from another store. You're going to have to go over here. Like all these type of things. Don't mess around with that. Just go to rockauto.com. It's at home on your computer or in your pocket on your mobile device. You're going to save time and money. Why would you choose to spend 30% or 50% more with an auto parts store when you can get it for almost half the price at Rock Auto? A Honda Odyssey fuel pump is at $353 from a chain store. It's just $216 from Rock Auto. They're a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. They got everything you need from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution for your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Locked On in their How'd You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets, thanks for making us part of your day and your first listen each and every day. Make sure to check out Locked On NBA. Adam will be on Friday, so you can listen to that and check that out. If you're listening to this on Friday, go listen to it right after you get done with this one and hear all his takes on the playoff games. There are none. He gets a night. He has a Locked On NBA assignment with no games. I'm very jealous. I'm very mad. It's not fair.
I don't know. I'd actually rather break down games. The script is written for you. It's like, all right, I watch this game. I have opinions.
It's always funny. You're always like, what are we going to talk about? And then I give you like 2 topics and then we're 35 minutes.
Matt's very good at coming up with topics, by the way, guys. As if somebody who has to come up with topics from time to time too, it can be very difficult. Matt's very good at it.
I always have something to say. Steve Augustine says, Twitter's got me confused. A lot of unofficial sources saying Embiid's going to win MVP. NBA reps planning to go to Sixers Heat Game 3. Okay, so this report came out yesterday, right? So it's a guy from Fox News, from Fox Sports, very different, Fox Sports. He's done work at New York Times, a couple places. I know someone who has been his boss who's worked with him before, and he vouches for the guy and says that he's reputable. Now, he's a younger guy, and he's freelance, and he's trying to make a name in the industry. Now, I'm not saying that he's wrong. Here's what I can tell you. The Nuggets have not been told that Nikola Jokic has won MVP. I'm not surprised at this. Those results are typically kept very, 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 very tight by the NBA for a number of reasons. They're delivered by the law firm Ernst & Young, and they're delivered in official. Like, these results are encrypted and sent over officially. There's an in-depth conversation. Like, no, I'm serious.
I know. I just love that you're entertaining this. This is like, I love it.
Yeah. So there's this whole thing with it. So the idea is that Adam Silver and these guys are going, and they're going to Game 3. And why? And so the tweet was very specifically worded. It appears by all accounts was the tweet. It was later deleted. Okay. The fact that it was deleted, I have reason to think that it was not deleted just because the person was like, well, found out that I was wrong. That could be it. I have reason to think that's not the case as of yet. The biggest reason, honestly, that I do not think the report is accurate is that Friday is an ESPN doubleheader. TNT has the rights to the media coverage of the awards.
Yep.
Sunday, TNT has the late game, Sixers Heat, Game 4 in Philadelphia. So that would make sense. But unless it's NBA officials are traveling for both games 3 and 4, which is not what happens. Adam Silver's not going to be out of the office. That doesn't make sense. Additionally, you've mentioned the guy Crossfire on Twitter before, who I shouted out yesterday.
I have?
Yeah. And have you not? Maybe that was on Locked On NBA.
Don't know who I know that. I don't think I know that name.
It's Crossfire. He's a Rockets fan that started doing this, but he's like the, I don't know, 3rd, 4th reasonable one I've ever met. He talks about, he actually tracks, he has a Google Doc that publicly tracks.
Oh yeah, I know the public tracking. Yeah.
Yeah. So Jokic has 69% nice of the 54 available public first place votes.
Yeah.
Like, I had somebody in my mentions yesterday basically being like, Matt, you cannot entertain this. It's mathematically not possible. Like, all of the remaining 46 votes would have to go the other way. And so, like, the lead is over 150 points already from verified public.
The one thing I'll say, like, I don't entertain this. Like, was it PointsBet that handed out the winnings if you bet on Jokic? Like, casinos don't make mistakes when money's at stake. That's just a rule of thumb. They just don't. So when you see a line and the line seems so ridiculous, like, what? How are the Warriors underdogs by 13? They probably know Steph Curry's not playing. Like, you can assume that sports books don't usually do crazy things without having knowledge, including paying out MVP bets. But the one thing I will say is I talked to one reporter, I'm not going to name who when the straw polls came out said that he wouldn't be surprised if reporters start lying in those straw polls because they don't like giving ESPN free content. And he wouldn't be surprised if people were lying on Twitter and podcasts about their ballot because they don't want to give away free content. It's not my perspective. I think that's to me, that's like a surprising perspective, but it was shared by somebody I know that has a vote and said that other people with votes feel this way. And I was like, wild. So that's the only thing you can hang your hat on is maybe a lot of these reporters are lying publicly about their votes.
Just say no. Like, Tim Bontemps, just tell Tim Bontemps no. Like, Howard Beck doesn't do it. Like, there's a lot of guys that are honestly like, I don't have a vote, so I don't engage.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I have a hard time believing about. I have a real hard time believing that they're lying. I trust the person that you're saying that there's probably going to be a contingent of people, like a small contingent. I know the type of writer that would do this, but I would just tell you that I would continue to be very, 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 very surprised if Nikola Jokic doesn't win MVP. Look, the reason that I went down this rabbit hole, as you're just like, why are we spending time on this? I try and be very open to the idea that I'm wrong. That's the only thing.
Yeah, I agree. So, it's fair.
Now, one thing that I'm not wrong about is that, holy God, the Phoenix Suns are good. The Mavs were all excited because they got that first round series win versus the Jazz. They were very pumped up, and we got Luka, and Luka's the best player in the world. And oh my God, Chris Paul last night. I mean, honestly, it was some serial killer stuff. It was just, it is very rare. Even when teams will target a guy, they'll do like, all right, we're going to pick on him twice, and then we'll go do something else, or a guy will take a transition three or whatever. And Chris Paul got the ball every single time and was like, I'm running this into the ground. I'm going after you.
The Suns dominated that game so much that they didn't just win in blowout fashion in the fourth quarter, but they did it the exact way they wanted to, which was by targeting Luka Doncic over and over again. This was a the Suns actually have this in them. And I thought Devin Booker did this when he came to Denver. Like, he scored 46 points because he wanted it to know, like, oh, you guys think Jokic the MVP? Look at me. I'm going to drop all these points on him. The Suns, for whatever reason, they're a very vindictive team, and they've earned the right to be that. They're good enough that they get to be vindictive. Last night was they were picking on Luka because they were like, we're not just going to win. I want to make sure the narrative tomorrow is we went after Luka Doncic every single time in the fourth quarter, and we scored on him every single time. And they did. They scored on him every time. It was mean. It was honestly like,
it was mean.
Without breaking any rules, that was maybe the meanest I've ever seen a fourth quarter go.
Yeah, it
was absolutely brutal.
Yeah, it was ruthless is the word
ruthless.
I would use.
Yep, that's the perfect word.
Chris was so good last night. I think it's interesting looking back at Nikola, who's a couple of years older. Right. And he reached the point. Was it 1920? No, it's 2021 when he like got in shape midseason, right? That was when he said, like, he went to them and the training staff and was like, I want to get in shape. Luka's got to have that moment.
Yep.
That's a lot of this is like, he came into camp out of shape and played himself into like halfway good shape. And now he has a 40%. I heard this on Mavs Moneyball podcast from Josh Bowe, who's great. Luka has a 40% usage rate in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's too high.
LeBron's highest ever was 37.8.
Yeah, it's
like
insane.
That's not. And I'll say this, like, that's what Luka wanted.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny, man, because every athlete goes one of two directions. Every great athlete, I should say, they go through moments of loss and failure, and they say, like, my team's not good enough, or they just look around. And Luka, these last few years, what has the story been? Look at the numbers. Was Luka the best player in the first round? They lost, but they just don't have the team. You got to do this. And there's always a kernel of truth to it. And the James Hardens of the world sort of go that route where, like, it never happens. Then there's the other route where a player looks at it and says, it doesn't matter that my team's not good enough. It doesn't matter that I'm not championship season for us or whatever. It's what lesson do I take away? And if I think that last night might tilt things in the favor for Luka of, wow, they went out me. Like, they were, yes, my teammates weren't good enough and this or that, but whatever. But they, at the end of the game, thought I was the weak link. And guess what? They were right. And they go that direction. It's like, I have to get better at a lot of different things. So we'll see what happens with Luka in that regard. But that was honestly tough to watch. The Suns are good, though, Matt. Your broader question is, the Suns are very good.
Suns are good. And I guess the question here then is, how do you look? We've talked about, like, changing the roster up. What's an approach? What's a scenario in which Denver can beat that team 4 times out of 7?
Well, this is why you have to have more length and more just competent players, because the Mavs were content to switch everything and they got cooked. I mean, Chris Paul has gamed the system in a lot of ways. Like, he knows exactly how to take advantage of being the undersized guard in open space, and they have enough competent guys to punish you. So Denver's going to have to just be able to have length so that maybe they don't have to switch, or they can try their hardest to avoid switching or helping off with length against teams like that. The second part of this is they just have to be. I mean, my thing is, I don't think you're going to avoid, like, Denver's not going to hold the Suns if they've matched up in a series this year, even at their peak. They wouldn't be holding them to 90 points, 95, 100 points, 105 points, 110 points. They'd be holding them to 150, or you'd hope they're holding them to 115 or 120 points. The difference is you've got to badger them on the other end. You have to be just as unsolvable. And more importantly, they have a great player on the other side of the court in DeAndre Ayton. Nuggets have a great player in Jokic, and you have to make closing minutes without Ayton, which means you have to play him off the floor through foul trouble, which I think Denver could do. You just have to be good enough to get to that point.
I agree with all this. I'm in the same place with you on, I think if you're going to beat him, you got to beat him with offense. I really do think that that's like the mechanism is going to be. I don't think you can solve their defense or their offense. I don't think you can solve it defensively, even if you had the personnel, which the Nuggets don't. I think
you have to be able to switch 1 through 5 against that team to be able to stop them. Denver doesn't have that.
Something else that's kind of interesting here is I want to get your thoughts on this. So game plan discipline is really, really important, I think, versus the Suns. And they honestly, if you look at the first 6 quarters of that series, the Mavs hung. Like they were within contact range. And they had the lead at half last night. And what they were doing was they actually were running drop. Like they were running drop coverage versus they were blitzing Booker to get the ball out of his hands. They were saying, we're not going to live with Booker scoring on us. We're going to get the ball out of his hands as much as possible. We're going to live with Chris mid-rangers. And we're going to try.
Denver made the same bet, though. Denver made the same bet last year.
I know. So this is the question. And like their thing, and Mike Prater was talking about this, about how the Bucks actually, they had the same strategy, which was like, they're going to make Chris Paul beat you. And they were like, we're not going to give you the Mikal Bridges threes. We're not going to give you Jay Crowder threes. We're not going to give you Ayton dunks. You're going to have to hit all these tough shots, and you're going to have to do it against great defense, and you're going to have to work on the other end over and over and over and over and over again. Right.
Yeah.
And so I guess my question then is, Chris is shooting. Let me pull this up real quick. I have this. Chris Paul in the NBA playoffs, like a normal human does, is shooting 72% from mid-range.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, like, one, maybe Chris won't be like touching the face of God.
Well, here's the thing. Chris Paul did this last year against the Nuggets where he shot this ridiculous percentage. It's a lot easier to shoot like that when you're up in a series and when you're very comfortable. Like, you have to make that team uncomfortable. And I'm not saying you make them uncomfortable defensively. Milwaukee does have length. So those open mid-range jumpers have a 6'10" guy running out at you instead of a 6'1" guy. That makes a little bit of a difference. But I think more than anything, it's just, is it a tied series? Is it a tied game? Are the Suns down? All of a sudden, shooting 70% from the mid-range becomes a little bit harder, as opposed to, you're up 8 and you're up 1-0 in a series. Yeah, it's going to be pretty easy just to get to your spot and rise up and knock those down.
Do you think the Nuggets at full strength can beat the Suns next year in a playoff series if the Suns return this core?
Yes. I don't know that I would pick them to do it, but I don't think they are hopeless against them. The Nuggets are really good and would present just as many problems. And the biggest question to me is, last year it looked like DeAndre Ayton handled Jokic. When I say handled him, I mean Jokic didn't look as dominant as he would need to win that series. But the Nuggets were getting murdered in so many different other areas that it just didn't matter. And you almost wondered, like watching that series, you almost felt like Jokic was conserving energy. Like this problem is so hard to solve that me going 100% is not even going to make a difference. I do wonder, though, if you have all of your pieces there, can Jokic dominate Ayton? And I tend to think yes. I tend to think he can. You put some proper spacing around them. Now you can't help quite as much. Jokic's going to go right at him. Can Ayton play 34 minutes without fouling out? I don't know. I think Jokic has gotten to a level now that I would take Jokic winning that matchup enough that it compromises what they want to do most comfortably.
I think there's 2 things in your favor. One, he's definitively better than he was last season. And 2, from my perspective, if he can figure out Draymond Green, which he did, he can figure out anybody. I agree. Like Draymond is one of the 4 best defenders I've ever seen. Draymond, in my opinion, he legitimately may be the best defender I've ever seen. Like, all things considered, versatility, I don't know if there's a better one. And
who's a better defender, Gobert or Ayton?
Do what?
Who's a better defender, Gobert or Ayton?
Oof. Rudy, he fouls less.
I think it's clearly Gobert. I mean, I think Ayton's a really good player. I have a lot of respect for him. But
I have a lot of respect for what Rudy's done on the perimeter. That was a problem for him versus Harden. He worked on it. Like, he got better. Like, he's okay in space. Their problem this season was not.
I'm actually meaning more just about guarding Jokic, not about what he does. I'm just saying of like who's
Gobert does. Yeah.
Because Jokic helped Gobert too. Like, this is my thing is Ayton did a really good job when the game plan was stop Jokic, nothing else matters. But when the game plan becomes like, okay, but we can't help off Murray and we have to do this. And Michael Porter, we can't leave him open. And
I feel like if Jamal's in a good spot physically and mentally by the time the playoffs come around and they face them, I think Jamal would have a huge series versus them.
Yeah.
I think Jamal would have a huge series versus them. But Luka Doncic is having a time.
Here's what's funny about a series. When you're so outmatched the way Denver was last year and Dallas is now, a team just gets to play all the hits, and there's no and you just are like, wow, this team does everything. But when you get things like, here's a thing that could happen. You could have a scenario, Matt, where Devin Booker, like Jamal Murray has an incredible game one, and Devin Booker goes, I have to outplay him. And like just these little dynamics change because the Suns are so good because guys don't have to do that too often. Like they have a bunch of different guys that can beat you, but you get a little like Sports Center's talking about, is Jamal Murray better than Devin Booker? And all of a sudden, no, he's not. I'll show them. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, now you're away from your game plan a little bit. So the Suns, Nuggets just haven't made the Suns have to even think about that stuff because they haven't had their guys.
I don't necessarily want to compare the two because they are very different, but I do want to kind of note this as far as that Sun series would go. Duncan Robinson is paid a healthy amount of money by the Miami Heat. Yeah. He's played 0 minutes versus the Philadelphia 76ers.
It's so crazy.
None. And it's going to be fine. Duncan's going to be fine.
Oh, I see.
And so I think there are players that you have to just be like, he's too good, too important. Like Nikola Jokic is one of those guys. Jamal's one of those guys. Okay. I personally think that the Phoenix Suns might be a series in which Michael Porter Jr. might just not need to play as much. Like that just might mean, if he can play at all, that might need to be a thing that is thought about.
Yeah.
For that, as we break down Suns Nuggets 2023. All right, that's going to wrap it up for Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Really appreciate it. Hope you have yourselves a great Friday. And we'll talk to you guys. Adam has Bronco Squash tomorrow to talk about the cap. And then I'll be with you on the weekend going over playoff series and whatever else is rambling around my head about the Denver Nuggets as we continue here through the offseason. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a great week. Thanks for the comments on YouTube. Make sure to give us, by the way, give me a 5-star review. I haven't mentioned the team in months. I deserve those 5-star reviews.
Months.
I want the 5-star reviews. I want a good 5-star review. I want it. Give me a 5-star review. Give it to me. Give it to Adam. You all love Adam. Give it to Adam. Talk to you guys.